For those of you who've been loyal visitors and come every time, you've heard me say this beginning shtick a few times. Apologies, I'm going to say it yet again. 1, if your phones are on or you're not sure if they're off, please be sure to turn them off. It regularly happens if something buzzes or rings. 2, for those of you who have classes at 6 p.m. and have to sneak out, we completely respect and understand that, but do please be advised that the doors bang very loud. And there's nothing more annoying than being in the kind of final part of a talk and having it interrupt by bang, 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 bang. So please go ahead, use those doors if you have to sneak out, but just hold it gently and let it close quietly out of respect for the people who are still talking in the room. Number 3, this talk is being video recorded. You might notice that the video camera is right up here in the front, so your faces will not be recorded, but your voices will. If you have any issues with that, don't ask a question, but as I say every week, we hope you will ask questions at the end of the talk. The other thing I want to point out before going into my kind of introduction of our speaker for this evening is that we still have 3 more talks this semester after this one, so please do come back on the 23rd of November, 30th, and the 7th for our last 3 talks. And I want to note that there is a show downstairs that Tanya is going to be talking to you about. Tanya and our previous speaker from last week, Marilyn Oliver, both have work downstairs, and it closes tomorrow. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you come and see it. And there's a question in the front already. Yes, Liz?
Is my talk on the 30th or on the Wednesday? It says Wednesday.
Okay, so I will see what error happened there, and I will send out an email. So note that it is on the Thursday, the 30th, not on Wednesday. These talks are on Thursday, so thank you for noticing, and thank you. So please erase that, use your extra special skills, erase that, and put in Thursday. Thank you. So, okay. So we'll put this back in here, and we're all good? Mm-hmm. Yeah?
We'll wait to see who starts.
Oh, okay, well, I'm just going to do a quick little introduction first,
done.
and then squishy.
It was working.
Oh, okay. So do you,
Yeah, we'll have to try it in here.
Oh, okay. You know what, why don't you transfer it onto my computer there? Mine will work, and so apologies for this.
It's my fault. The computer died and
Yeah, no, mine will work perfectly, it did. So while Tanya's setting up the PowerPoint on the computer, I want to take a moment and introduce her. And hopefully the timing will work out well, but otherwise please bear with us. So first, I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're situated on Treaty 6 territory. And as you know, this is the traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. Now, this is an acknowledgement that we hear a lot. Right? But with that acknowledgement comes the opportunity and indeed the obligation to recognize and respond to the university as a settler colonial institution and work to remake it from within. And this indeed is something that our speaker tonight actively does in her work as an academic and her work as an artist. So Tanya Harnett is a member of the Carry-the-Kettle First Nations in Saskatchewan. She's an artist, and she's an associate professor here at the University of Alberta with a joint appointment in the Department of Art and Design and Native Studies. She works in various media, including photography, painting, printmaking, and fiber, much of which is on view downstairs. And she's exhibited nationally, internationally, and regionally, and was a central figure in the creation of a program at the University of Lethbridge, a BFA that has specializations in art history and in studio and in museum studies, but the BFA is entirely in Native American studies. And it was in fact the first in Canada for art history and museum studies, and the 4th in Canada for a studio specialization in Native American studies. So in 2015, she was elected to the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts. She was also awarded the Queen's Jubilee Medal by the Lieutenant Governor General of Canada. And I would like to invite you to please join me in welcoming Tanya Harnett, who will talk to us about her work featuring, focusing mostly on the work that is downstairs in the exhibition in FAB called Attention Please. So please join me in welcoming Tanya Harnett.
sorry about the technical difficulties. Just let that get set up for a bit. Yes, I have to acknowledge that I'm on Treaty 6 territory, and that's one of those things that you would do for a First Nations person. You always are aware of where you are and where your family is. And it's one of those things that you just acknowledge. And so it is important for Aboriginal people to state who you are, what's your family, where you're from, and that's just traditional. We just always do it that way. So, how are we doing?
2 seconds out.
So what I'm going to be talking about is the works down there. There's 2 bodies of work and then 1 installation piece. And so I'll be talking about those. Sorry, this worked perfectly fine.
Nothing's in it.
You just saw it.
Yeah, but it's not showing up from my computer.
You just saw it.
Talk about your work downstairs, and the work you do in the university. And thank you all for your patience. And yes, all right, Tanya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm really sorry. Honestly, the computer was working, and we just had it on. Where's my students? Any one of my students from? It was working, wasn't it? Yeah, like I had it on the desk for 3 hours, and it was all working. There was 23%. So you're not going to be seeing the exact slideshow I was going to tell you. I was going to talk to you about the other piece, the Skull Mountainets piece that's in the far corner. But I am going to be talking to you about the water series. And with me saying it's important for us to tell everybody where we're from, this is where I'm from. So I'm just right up, right in the middle over there. And that's where my reserve is, and my family all live there. My mother lives there. And if I wasn't in a university, I'd probably be there too. So I always joke that I'm stuck in an institution. I've been institutionalized, and I only get let out in day passes in the holidays. That's my family. So my great-grandfather is on the left, and my grandmother with my uncle on her lap, and that's my grandma, and that's my grandfather. And he served in World War I, or World War II, and his father served in World War I and II. When they went to fight in the war, Indians lost their right to be Indians. They were enfranchised. And when they came back, they didn't get veteran rights either. So they knew that. My grandpa, who went to World War I and II, knew it and went right back to war because he was fighting for Canada. We have a history of being strong Indians and heavy with our culture, but also being strong Canadians. My great-grandfather was a chief, and here he is carrying the chieftain of pipes, the pipe of chieftains. He was a Victorian fellow, so he lived from 1876 to 1976, and was very much a person who followed both ways. He tried to keep tradition and also keep business. He's well known. Mostly, this book is well published, so anybody who is studying North American Indians in the world has read this book and knows of this book. So I can go to museums in England and say, hi, I'm Tanya Harnett, I'm granddaughter of the, and I automatically get like free pass into the back room and taking a look at museums. So I spend a lot of time in museums, and they've been very important to what I do. So His book is really informative of the work I'm doing. He was a really well-versed man. This is a Saskatchewan Historical Society document, and it's from 1941. And there's a second page. Tell me when to go. Tell me when to turn the page.
No.
Thanks, Liz. He advised Tommy Douglas on healthcare as well for Indians. He had a good relationship. There's a lot of publication on his work with Tommy Douglas as well. And so he was really a statesman. This is my territory. This is Carry-the-Kettle, and as you come into Carry-the-Kettle, we're just off of the Trans-Canada, 45 minutes out of Regina. And that road going over that way to the left is Grey Road. That's where my family has all lived for a long time, since we got the reserve and Carry-the-Kettle First Nations. So these images are down at the front entrance to the window. So this is the Wabamun Lake, and it's Paul Band. So Dennis Paul was the person who I thought of first when I was looking at doing this water series. So what happened is I was asked if I would do a First Nations perspective on the landscape for a TREX program, which is an AFA program, an AGA, both combined. And then I was told, well, sponsored by Syncrude. Oh yeah, so what do I do with this, right? Well, I'm not going to hide it. I'm going to do a First Nations perspective on the landscape, and I'm concerned about water, and that's my big concern, is about water. So if we're looking at that, what am I going to do? Go up north and go take a look at the oil sands? No, I thought I'd just keep it here in Treaty 6 territory, where I know this area, and I know these lakes. And so I kept it here, but there's a problem with that. I'm not from here, I'm from Saskatchewan. My reserve is in Saskatchewan. If I go into another reserve, they will ask me, who are you, where are you from, and they'll ask you, what's your aunt or uncle? And they'll name some really crazy aunt or really crazy uncle, and you go, oh, no, that's the other side of the family. So they place you right away. So if you're trespassing on their land and you do something wrong, it goes right back home. So what was I going to do? It was Heather Schillinglaw and Shane Goldie tasked to do this, and I was one of 4. 3 ended up doing it. The 4th one dropped off. So there's the space. There's that dot in space where you can see the it's okay. There's that spot in space. You can't get a mouse on there. There's a spot up there. You can see the Fort McMurray site from space. People say it, but you can actually really see it. So that's, I'm not going to go there. But what I did do is I went to the Drift Pile First Nations. I went to the Rubicon First Nations, Cold Lake First Nations, Alexa Sioux First Nations, and Paul Van. Fort McMac, there's Fort Chip. So I did some flyovers, taking a look at the oil sands project. And I went when Desmond Tutu was here, and he was doing a tour up there. And I went the first day, and he went the next day. taking tours, and then I did photos as well. And it's like Mordor. Has anyone seen the oil sands and flew over it? It's like Mordor. It's you can't imagine it. People say, oh yeah, it's like this weird space and it doesn't look like, or I don't think you can really comprehend it unless you see it. You can't imagine the vastness. But this is an image that I thought was really important, and I can't use a cursor, so I have to walk over here. That's one of the most huge tailing ponds you could ever imagine. So you got a bunker up here, and that's one of those trucks with big wheels, the giant wheels. And then down below you see 2 cars, and then the Athabasca River. When there was some troubles with the water, they thought this berm was going to break. It's not a matter of if this berm is going to break. It's a matter of when this berm is going to break. It's going to break. So going back to Wabamun, why was I interested in Wabamun? I remember the day there was this train derailment. There was 700,000 liters of crude oil that was released on this train derailment, and it contaminated the waters. Why I remember it is because I was at the Royal Alberta Museum with Dennis Paul from the Paul Band. And Dennis Paul, he said, I want to take you to the place where we had the cleanup site. And so this was the cleanup site, and he went up to the water this high, and to highlight where the trauma was in the water, he threw a bucket of red food coloring, highlighting the space. And so that's what you're seeing there. They were cleaning up fish and birds and oil off of plants and rocks, and it was just a terrible mess. It was the closest place where that train came to the water. Why it happened right there? Just unlucky. Alexis Sioux. I used to live beside Lake Lac St. Anne, about 3/4 of kilometers away. And I asked somebody from that place to take me there because, again, I can't trespass and just take. I have to take a look at the space with somebody. They have to tell me what the problem is with their water bodies. And Percy Potts asked me to come. And with that, he showed me this cyanobacteria. So the plants that are here never existed before. And you guys have seen this on lakes. In August, the lakes get all that scummy, gooey stuff. That's a cyanobacteria. And there's warnings on Alberta Health on every summer where you can't go in the lakes. Vertebrates actually aren't supposed to drink out of that, and they warn farmers not to bring their cattle close to there to drink either. So that's a big collection on it off to the side. The Driftpile River is downstream from the Swan Hills gas wells, the fields, and they're a really complex crisscross structure. The person who put the colored water in here was a counselor from this reserve. Now they have a lot of problems because they're just at the end of this river and they got all that stuff washing up. So what he did was pour that water and then or the coloring, and then he told me that he didn't want to give me his name. And I know his name, He said, but I don't want the name to be released. And that was because he was a counselor. There's business, money involved on reserves. Some of the people will take money, some people won't take money. It's complicated reserve politics. Like, how do you deal with these things. So the counselor says, yeah, this is where my problems are, but I can't talk about it. So that's what the gas wells look like, the field. And just to give you a little bit of a description, that's a gas well. And on this side, that little thing has a house, and you can look at specs, and those are cars. And so I'll just go back, and then you can see how many of those are in there. And the river goes right upstream. So Cold Lakes First Nation, actually I had, I've been good friends with Alex Janvier. He's kind of like a grandpa. So in Aboriginal art, we kind of have uncles and grandpas and cousins, and we have sort of a familial way to relate with each other. And most Aboriginal First Nations my age would say, yeah, Grandpa Alex Janvier. He's one of the group of 7, and really laid the foundation for most of us. And so we look to Alex as being the first person who got a degree. And he was the first Bush person who went through. Incidentally, up until, I don't know, it was about the 50s, you had to have a pass to get off the reserve. You had to have an Indian pass in your pocket. Otherwise, the police will stop you and say, why are you walking the streets? So Alex literally had to have a pass and got stopped all the time. And that, can you imagine, that's the first person who gets a degree. We came a long way since then. Why he took me there was that was Berry Creek, Berry Beach, and it's also called English Bay, but he calls it Berry Way. And he was a kid, and as he was running up and down that stream, what you saw there was a damaged spring. And he said, you know, I used to take the water from here and have to run it up and give it to the elders. Now, Alex is 82 or 83, and so for him to think that this is a memory that's going to be gone was a big deal. There was damage being done to that spring. They put a protest and they put a halt to this expansion on the spring, and they won that case by speaking Dene. When the judge said, I can't understand you, you have to speak English. And he said, no, I don't have to speak English in Dene. And he said, that's my language of this place. And of course, it's the language of the area. And he won that case. But then they put out signs all over the place for English Bay. And they put those big cement bunkers that you can't drive past. And they're usually got orange neon stuff on it. Well, those were put all over this area. And these were like really close to each other, probably about 10 meters away from each other. So yes, no one could use the place, but neither could First Nations people. Rubicon has a long-standing problem with they didn't get signed on the treaty. What happened is when the people who came to make the treaty agreements came to the Rubicon territory, they didn't make it into the bush that far. So they didn't get the Rubicon to sign the treaty. So they never did get that. So they're a sovereign nation. They haven't done anything other than, we've seen protests that have happened because of the Rubicon. The Rubicon is responsible for some of the most important museum issues and developments in the world, internationally. There was a task force on First Nations and museums. And this task force indicated the rules of engagement, and that particular task force report has been used internationally. We have a very young Rebecca Belmore. Does anybody know Rebecca Belmore's, who her art is? Yeah, this is an early Rebecca Belmore performance, 88. I don't know how old she would have been, but she's put herself as an artifact piece. I think this makes her predate James Luna. So those are the pieces downstairs. Incidentally, this past week, these kids from the Chancellor's office, he's doing youth school, and these young kids came in, and they were from Fort McKay. And so Fort McKay is just upstream from the Athabasca oil sands project. So they get the brunt of it up there. There's a lovely man named Dr. OConnor, and he went up to the United Nations and made a protest. He's a fantastic man. He's just really full of vigor, and when he gets mad, he's like jiggly, and he's hot-headed. But there's a good reason. There's people who are getting cancer all over the place. So those kids, I'm talking to them, and they get this without even blinking. They get it. I said, so, okay, how many of you kids, how many of your family members got cancer? Arms go up. This one bubbly kid goes, he's really happy, but he goes like this, like he's asserting himself. And I look over to the teacher, because the teacher's going to stop in and interrupt it, and she says, he's lost 3 family members. And I said, and I put my hand on his leg and just patted him, and he was really good about it. And yeah, he lost 3 family members. So this is not anything new. So these kids are sitting in front of us going, yeah. And so they all knew Dr. OConnor too. When Dr. OConnor went to the UN and made a big plea and a rage, this has to be stopped, there's something that's got to be done, he went back to work in Fort McKay, and he was fired. I'm going to talk about where these works have gone, because they were made for kids. With the TREX program, it travels all through schools. But they went to Hungary, they've gone to Aberdeen, they've gone to Oxford, and this is the Oxford University Pitt Rivers Museum, which is amazing. The Pitt Rivers Museum is rightly called the Museums of Museums, because you can't actually touch anything. Augustus Pitt Rivers said he donated his collection, had this building attached, and all of his stuff had to be in the way he put it in there. So oars are with oars, spoons are with spoons. All the colonies have their stuff in certain cages and whatnot. And there's shrunken heads and just awful things in here. So I'm asked to submit my work to this place. And my work is on the opposite side of this wall. On the opposite side of this wall. And these are on the inside. So I'm standing at the corner, right where that door is, and I'm looking both ways, and I'm thinking about the timelines. 1876, well, that's when our treaty was being signed. 1888, when this building was being built. All of these things are correlating all these things that happened in my family at the particular time. Okay, well, smallpox was going through our territory right around this time. That predates this. And I can talk about that history. And then I'm thinking about, well, what's up those stairs? It's the Museum of Natural History. And they have a buffalo bones there, and up farther there's another balcony on the other side, and the balcony is where they had the great Darwin debates. So I'm standing in that corner and going, so this is where it all went wrong. And what I'm thinking is, if this was the Enlightenment period and the Industrial Revolution, and this is from an English colonial perspective, this is the remnants that is happening today. So this is where it all went wrong. So you can imagine from an Indian viewpoint what that would mean. It's not too long ago when the buffalo were exterminated. My great-grandfather was alive when he saw herds of buffalo over the hills. He remembers as a kid jumping from buffalo to buffalo to buffalo carcass, chasing a skunk. And he lived from 1876 to 1976. I went to his funeral. I remember the funeral well. It was a beautiful day, and my grandmother was making Kool-Aid, and a fly went in it. And I said, I'm not drinking that. And she flipped the fly out, then still poured me Kool-Aid. So little things like that you remember as a kid. Both Scotland and Oxford, the students were in avid protest about the oil sands and unethical oil and gas. This is written from a woman from Christchurch. Christchurch is where Harry Potter is. I was so happy about seeing the Harry Potter where McGonagall was standing. And anyway, so she's from Christchurch, and she wrote this article and pushing for the de-investment of unethical oil and gas. It's gone through for Oxford. The students in Aberdeen have been pushing. About 6 months later, the government put a moratorium on fracking in Scotland. And we have these images up right now here in Edmonton, and they're not getting any pickup. Nobody's saying anything about it. We're not seeing the U of A thinking about divesting in unethical oil or gas. Not the oil sands yet. Why? Everybody else in the world knows there's a problem. So, yeah, we do have problems on my reserve. We have arsenic in the water, and we have E. coli. And we've had to get water treatment plants into the place, and then we sometimes bring in bottled water. We were going to have Energy East going right through my reserve, and they were going to put it through a 1957 old pipeline that would not take the pressure that they were going to be putting through the Energy East pipeline. So, thank goodness, because I don't know what I would have done. I might have to be let out for a longer day pass, maybe a big hall pass or something, and have to protest. But there are protests happening about water, and First Nations people are the first responders. Now, what I had for you in my other talk was to talk about museums and museum pieces a little bit more, and then talk about the self-portrait series that's up. I don't know how many people have seen the gallery. Oh, good, then I don't feel like I'm crazy. Okay, so the self-portrait series was a project with 2 images that I had done. And I love this project. It was a project that was done with our curator in the gallery in our university. And what she decided to do was have every year a theme, and faculty had a show, and based on this theme, and so we made work for this. It was really fun, actually. And this one particular was about self-portraiture, and I didn't want to do it. I was really, meh. And then well, this is interesting. I'm scared of it. Maybe I have to do them really big. So I think when you have monsters under the bed, you just go right underneath them, and then they're not so scary anymore. So what I did is I made them bigger, and when I did have them that big, a woman named Joan Stebbins, who's a curator, she's retired now, but she has the Order of Canada, and she saw those, and she said the two, and she said, "Okay, Tanya, I want you to do a whole room of these." And she says, "I'm calling the exhibition Persona Grata." That's a tough one. So, how do you do your persona when you were trying to hide in the first place? Apparently, and I didn't notice, somebody told me afterwards, out of the 16 portraits there's only 8 eyes that are shown. So I spent a lot of time trying to hide it, but I spent a lot of time in that, looking at how paint was being put on me, talking about going over top of, walking over Carl Andre, looking at Anna Meddetta's clay, connecting sort of masculine, feminine identities, part of my history, and looking at the one that's when my head is down. That one is called The Sleep of Reason, and it says white lies on the top, and white, and then lies and shadows. And that's talking about Goya's print. Sleep of Reason produces monsters. And so, much like what we saw with the Pitt rivers, I was thinking about how the whole thing went wrong, and how in the Enlightenment period, and reason has the monsters behind it. So I think we all have the responsibility to, and I think this is the word that I keep bringing up, and it keeps coming to mind, is that we are citizens. A lot of us have been thinking about, well, what can we do? And like, we're groups, and what can we do in this group? And can we do anything in this room? Well, yeah, we can. And we have a civic responsibility and a citizen responsibility to participate in what it is we have to fix. And if whatever it is in our community to make it better, we have that responsibility. And so when I'm seeing things happening, I think that by making art, it can change just by people looking at art. So offspring of the show that's here, I got something else. I thought this show should last longer than just being here. So I went and bought wild cards, those wild cards, the ones you see in restaurants all the time. They have those advertisements on, you know what I'm talking about? You could buy, you go to the restaurant, they have this stack of postcards all over, and they're trying to sell the opera or whatever it is they're trying to sell. Well, I bought a whole bunch of those, and they're going to go all across the city. So then they're going to be images that you can take a look. That cost me $1,000, but I think that people will pick it up and they'll say, "What the hell is this? This isn't the opera," and then they'll actually want to figure it out a little bit more. But I think if you can just change the way people think and look, images have that power, and we can change things with just images. I think I better leave it there, and I'm very sorry that it was blah, and you guys didn't get to see the talk that I wanted you to see, but it's close.
I think if there are any questions, this would be a great time to open up to a Q&A.
questions?
So you say you've been thinking about what went wrong, because you've thought about it a lot. So what do you think went wrong, and what could have not happened, or what could have been different?
That's great. Well, with the Enlightenment period, the way people collected things were, it's about the colonies. So the Industrial Revolution, if we're thinking about Adam Smith and the invisible hand, I always joke that the invisible hand has no heart or head. There was no thinking about what capitalism was doing. There still is no thought about what capitalism is doing. And where did that come from? We can go right back to Paxton's Crystal Palace, and we can think about what happened there and how it, we can see how Victoria, the Industrial Revolution was celebrated then. That's the height of going through the colonies. There was something wrong with thinking about what the responsibility is. The invisible hand doesn't work. So responsibility is not there. And that's why I think talking about the sleep of reason produces monsters. So I think we had a sleep of reason. I don't know if that answers your question.
I guess you were saying there is no answer, but I was wondering what you're thinking. The things you can pinpoint. I guess, and the Crystal Palace then is
Yeah.
interesting point.
Any other questions?
The food coloring that got thrown in a few different bodies of water, whose idea was that?
Mine. So it's red food coloring. So it's a bucket full of red food coloring given to each person to highlight where they thought their troubles were.
And how was that received by these different people?
Oh, they loved it. Yeah, they loved it. They could actually see it. And that's the thing, is that we can't see what's in the water that's contaminating the water. For people to use the red to highlight where they saw wrong that couldn't be seen was important. Yeah.
Is the association with blood something that you were interested in bringing up? Because
Well,
we didn't talk about that.
Yeah. It's the TREX program. I guess I should have said this. The TREX program with the AGA goes to high schools, or goes to schools and libraries. So that was 2 years of traveling schools and libraries. So I was thinking about who my audience was, and it's kids. It's kids. I wanted to make sure kids saw the problems. And they know the graphic nature in comic books and video games and things like that. Red doesn't, they catch it, but they know that it's, in video games, it's graphic. And not in just a gore graphic, it's a graphic image. So that was really what I was doing, was making sure kids could see it. So I don't know how many schools it did visit and how many people saw it in the libraries, but I can tell you when it went through Aberdeen, or Oxford, it was mostly kids that saw it because the kids come in the museum, and apparently the clicker count for going into the museum while the show was up was 30,000. So if we could just get one kid who says, yeah, that's wrong, and then now how are we going to fix that? That makes all the difference. And so even if those cards, those 3,000 cards that are around the city, one person says, yeah, that's wrong, and they have some power to change things, that's enough.
why do you think there was such a different response to the exhibition here compared to here?
Well, I think we believe we need the industry. We have said, yes, it's part of our life. We have resources. It is part of our industry. And it's true. We're not going to wean off that really right away. What would I like to see? I'm not being unrealistic about what we have for industry for this province. But what I'd like to see is more responsibility for cleanup and taking a look at how we can have more useful ways to gather energy. And I think we can start going that way. I honestly, when looking at the oil sands project, I don't think that space can be reclaimed. I don't think there's reclamation that can happen in that space. It's so dark, it looks like a giant cancer. I don't know if that's your question.
How did Syncrude receive the series?
That's a good question. Yeah, they were there when they first opened and they came up and they said, yeah. These are yours? Yeah. Okay. And that was it. It was like nothing. They didn't want to talk to me. But they're not going to stop me. Oh, but later, yes, later. The magazine, they have a magazine that they put out. And the magazine fellow called me and they said, we want to do a profile on you for their Syncrude magazine. And yes, and this happens often because what they do is they take on the artists to say, look, we're addressing this issue, we're looking at this. But what they do is use artists to illustrate that they are thinking about it. So I never responded. And then when I didn't respond, it went through and I checked out who this guy was, checked his background, what he did, where's his, actually LinkedIn, went all the way back to see what was his jobs, and like, yeah, I know where he came from. And then, so somebody else called me, and I went, this guy's trying to do his dang thing. And then they had a local writer who's written on me in Sweetgrass magazine. And they knew he's written on me a couple times. And they asked him if that he would write for them on me. And I said, no. I said, sorry, I'm not doing it. I'm not your good news story.
So I almost tried to spin it a different way.
Yeah, I'm not letting the spin happen. I don't really care. Yeah.
That was a really important, in the show downstairs, the final pictures of the mist rising up over the land.
Yeah.
But it was important to read the label.
Yeah.
On these pieces here,
Yeah.
the label wasn't as sort of crucial, and yet it would have been important. And I'm just wondering, my question is, a bit more didactic context. If you want more of that or not?
Well, see that, okay, so maybe I'll set that up, because that was going to be in the show, and that was a really important part of the slideshow that I didn't show, so I just decided to drop it. For those of you who did see the exhibition, there are two large plexiglass pieces that are off in the back channel. They're large photographs. For those of you who didn't see it, there are two different hills on the plexiglass that kind of come together. There's sort of they come together in a place. But those hills are, they have a sort of a mist that's coming up in the background. It's a fog. And it's got this sort of light reflecting from the plexiglass from behind of it. Well, that was where the site of two smallpox epidemics. And the smallpox epidemics, it's in the 1837 and in the late 1700s. With that, teepee rings are all around. And according to my great-grandfather's writing, for us Assiniboine, Nakota, there was, his numbers claim 28,000 Assiniboine. Reduced to 2,600. 91% of the population gone. So if there was a teepee around there, they'd be leaving 9 behind and 1 would come out. And then what would happen is the teepee just collapses, goes back to the earth. It goes wreck. And so that's how you just let things go. So at some point in time, after the smallpox, the skulls were gathered from that area, and thousands of skulls covered those hills. You can't see them anymore because they've gone back to the ground, but you can sure feel them. And so what I did, well, it ended up that that reserve land was allocated to Carry-the-Kettle. We didn't get to pick what land we had. We didn't get a choice. We were assigned that land. Piapot said, there's no way I'm going there. That's the land of the dead. I'll find my own reserve. And he just picked up his people and went over to the Qu'Appelle Valley. My reserve is the land of the dead. So that's a story that is from my family and from that place. And there's a little bit longer narrative why I did that work, but it came from being asked to do something, and then I went to taking a look at my history. And a lot of the history that's in my great-grandfather's book. And I don't think that that's something that people get enough of from a First Nations perspective. You lose generations. I'm just lucky that he had a book, went to school, and he was well learned and wrote. So with the absence of those people, I put in fog machines down in the valley. Had a big pickup truck and a big generator and really long extension cords, and went to go photograph it at night. I was all by myself, and I went, oh, the setting sun, and it got like, this isn't right, it doesn't feel right here. And I was all alone on the way. I think I better go home, and I ended up shooting it in the morning because I wanted that light in the cloud or in the sky. So the smoke could represent the people who were no longer there. It could represent the smallpox. It could be a metaphor for the people who were there, or the smudging of the space itself too, or the smudging that occurred in that space. So it's a metaphor. So I guess it's what you can't see that's important, and that label makes you look to see what's not there. Is that good?
Yeah, I just think those pieces carry a lot, even before I read the label. There's a kind of, they're powerful and there's a melancholy. There's something there, so I think you did a great job. And then, of course, the label, confirms that and makes it specific. And that's a great combination. Thank you.
There's also a contrast there between something that is very attractive or attracting and well presented and so forth, and then have a label that sort of just informs you. And it's that contrast that I found really so important. And that's what hit home. So it's,
I usually tell my students, and I think some of them here would probably say, yeah, that's what Tanya says. Don't make a didactic panel. Don't put a label beside it that gives it away. It has to be the work that speaks for itself. Yeah. That's a tough call.
I was wondering, a lot of the images, like the water has a trauma in it, the water has a pain in it. I was wondering if you could speak to your relationship with water.
Well, two of those lakes I had childhood memories with. So Wabubin, I used to swim there when I was a young girl. And so I remember the lake before the generator plants came in. It was a beautiful lake. We used to go swimming and fishing, and I remember when it started to get a bit scuzzy. So I knew that one. Like, I knew that lake. And then Lac-Saint-Anne, I lived about a 3/4 of a kilometer away from that one. And by the time I moved there, I was in junior high, and it was already getting scuzzy. So that cyanobacteria was already, and it was itchy, right? And I didn't know what the heck it was, but you just couldn't, you didn't feel right, so you just didn't swim in that one. So I feel that. And with the Rubicon, it's got an art historical museology perspective that is so much a part of what I'm doing. And I spend so much time in museums. And I was at the ROM. I went to the ROM and I said, okay, that's it. I'm going to the ROM and I'm not going to talk to anybody. I knew who the person who was the ethnographer there and who kept the collections, but I'm not going to talk to him. I'm going to be a normal person and I'm going to walk through this place. Well, it ended up that they had a whole bunch of Edmund Morris's photographs up there, who was part of signing of the treaty. His father was part of at the signing of the treaty. So his father's Alexander Morris, and he was there as a kid. And they collected a whole bunch of Carry-the-Kettle stuff. And there was all this Carry-the-Kettle stuff, just huge amount. And I said, well, that's it, I gotta go find Arnie. And it took like 2 seconds, and he's down, and he's like, great, I'll show you. And he said, by the way, that dress that's on the cover of your grandfather's book, it's here. And I said, no way. So he said, yeah, come on, let's go. And there I am in the back room in the collections. So, you know, I've never gone through the ROM in a normal way. So that ends up happening an awful lot, is that people will say, can you come and take a look at the collections and see what you see. So I've learned a lot more just by hanging out in the back rooms. Actually, I learned more about what I don't know by hanging out in the back rooms. And I've lost some of my friends who are already in museum studies, so in the museum world, and so Jerry Conate, Alan Pard, Narcissus Blood, a lot of the people in the South have passed away, and so Frank Weaselhead. These are people who are now gone who kept that knowledge with them. And it became very clear to me that I had to keep that memory intact. So I probably still will always be working with museums, and I am working permanently for the last 12 years I've been working at the Brown, so on projects.
So I think if there are no more questions, one last question. Okay, don't want to stop anyone. Oh, there is. Yes, Cole, please.
Just since you've spent so much time on the back lines of museums, do you have any comments on what, and saying that most of your learning has happened in the back room, do you have any comments on what museums choose to show and not show of their collection?
Yeah, there's a lot that people don't know, and people will say that databases, let's database. Nobody knows collections like people. And so having people in the collections and learning from it, they can make valuable interconnections. So, there's many things that are in the back rooms. Those people who've been in the back rooms for a long time can say, oh yeah, there's that moccasin, and yeah, and they can go and get it, right? And it's because it's got red. You have something about red, and But what is not known, and people who are pretty honest will say, that tag says Blackfoot ? They don't know. Is that piece Cree or Métis? And sometimes that's a pretty close call. And so you have to find the lineage. And if you don't have it, then where is that? So there still needs to be a lot of work done, and with this being something that I felt really urgent is part of the reason why I started the BFA Native American Art History and Museum Studies, because I wanted to see those graduates coming through and being able to work First Nations, working with the collections themselves and finding out how they link to it with their own family. Because if it's like Glenbow on Blackfoot land, there's connections that they can make in the back rooms that others can't. Is that good?
Yeah, thank you.
So if there are no follow-ups, please join me in thanking Tanya one more time, and thank you all for your